Hello and welcome to Pluralsight's IT Ops News and Talk Show. I'm Don Jones, Curriculum Director for IT Ops Content, and this is our show for May 2016. Let's start with a quick news update from the world of IT brought to you by Pluralsight author Tim Warner.
Microsoft announced in May 2016 that Windows 10 is now installed on over 300 million active devices worldwide. Now know that Microsoft's announcement is significant because Windows 10, the client operating system, has only been out in the wild for 10 months. It was released to manufacturing in July 2015. Note also that Microsoft's announcement includes PCs, both desktop and laptop PCs, Microsoft Surface tablets, Microsoft Windows Phone 10-based smartphones, and Xbox consoles. Nonetheless, that's certainly a lot of devices. Another note that's important is that historically, that is to say over the previous 10 months, Windows 10 upgrade has been free. You may have been nagged in your Windows 7 or Windows 8.1 environment to perform the free upgrade. Note that that window, so to speak, closes on July 29, 2016. On July 30th forward, you're going to have to pay for Windows 10. The list price is $119 for a single-user license of Windows 10 Home or $199 for Windows 10 Pro. Microsoft has certainly done quite a bit of guerrilla marketing, as I said, nagging/encouraging/prompting users to do the in-place upgrade from their existing Windows version. Oracle and Google trial, Battle of the Titans. In May 2016, the trial is set to begin. Oracle is suing Google for copyright infringement. Specifically, Oracle is looking for $8.8 billion in damages from Google. Here's the deal. The Google Android mobile operating system is based in Java, and you might know or you might not know that in that Android source code, it is open source after all, includes about 7,000 lines of Sun Microsystems proprietary Java code. Now, Sun Microsystems, at the time when they owned Java, they didn't care if Google borrowed those lines of code for inclusion in Android. But once Oracle bought Sun and they discovered what was going on, Oracle sure got mad. At the center of this debate and center of the trial is the issue of copyright and whether Google has a claim for fair use of that code. Another thing that's going to be particularly problematic, as you can expect, is that this trial is going to involve heavily technical language. We're dealing, after all, with a mobile operating system. We're dealing with application programming interfaces, and that's stuff that most judges, I dare say, don't know much about. Certainly that would be the case probably for a jury, attorneys, and so on and so forth. Nonetheless, this is going to be an absolutely fascinating trial to watch. Finally, we have the issue of who is Satoshi Nakamoto. If you're familiar at all with the Bitcoin cryptocurrency, the distributed, anonymous, virtual currency that's been around now for a few years, it's had its ups and downs, literally and figuratively. Well, the identity of Bitcoin's architect has historically been in question. The pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto is not the person's real name. Specifically, an Australian entrepreneur named Craig Wright has recently come out of his own volition identifying himself as Satoshi, the original architect of Bitcoin. Now, and by his, I'm not necessarily saying Craig Wright's, as you'll understand in just a minute, but Satoshi's identity and his authorship of the 2011 white paper that defines Bitcoin has always been shrouded in mystery. Certain businesses, in particular Wired and Gizmodo, have devoted a lot of time and research trying to identify Satoshi by looking at his online posts and doing language comparisons and such things. And Wired and Gizmodo were pretty sure that Wright was Nakamoto. So when Craig Wright came out on his blog explaining that he was Nakamoto, at least these two companies received some measure of validation. However, and this is a big however, the latest news here is that Craig Wright deleted his explanatory blog post, and what he had promised to produce was proof of access to the earliest crypto keys in Bitcoin. In other words, it would be information. Craig would provide information that demonstrated he knows Satoshi Nakamoto's private key. If you go to his blog, drcraigwright.net, you'll find that he has a replacement, a JPEG image called I'm Sorry, in which he retreats back into the shadows. So once again, we have this Satoshi Bitcoin authorship controversy still gaining traction. And If you go to Reddit and other online discussion forums, you'll find a lot of people who are suspicious of Craig Wright, who say that he only backed off of his claim that he was Satoshi when he was asked to provide proof that he had access to the earliest crypto keys. Nonetheless, there are probably just as many other people who believe in the preponderance of evidence that Mr. Wright is in fact Satoshi. Does this matter a whole lot in the final analysis? Is this just an intellectual point, or is it significant? In some senses, the discussion's moot because as of this recording, the official architect of Bitcoin remains unknown.
And now for this month's security update from Pluralsight author Dale Meredith. Dale will also be joining us a bit later for our guest segment.
Hey, thanks, Don. Listen, this month I wanted to speak on something that I'm a big believer of, and that is just because you can doesn't mean you can. And I know you may be thinking, what? Well, this all comes around with the aspect of a recent case that just popped up. It's been all over the internet, but it's a gentleman in Florida who was charged with a criminal felony for disclosing vulnerabilities in a voting system in Florida, in Lee County. Now, the whole problem with this whole story is that the security analyst, he's a professional, security professional, his name's David Levin, and he was arrested 3 months after reporting this particular vulnerability on the elections website. This vulnerability is one we've seen almost everywhere. It's the concept of the SQL injection vulnerability. And what he was able to do was go through and pull up a table of usernames and passwords that they were storing in clear text. Now, the whole problem with this whole situation is the fact of he didn't have permission to do so. Now, I understand that a lot of people may be saying, but Dale, he went back and showed them what they did wrong. He helped them patch it. That doesn't matter. I mean, in a perfect world, it would, but there are certain laws. In particular, he was charged with 3 counts of unauthorized access to a computer network or an electronic device and had to pay a $15,000 bond. We'll see what happens to his case. But what he did is, as he showed this, he showed it on YouTube before he notified the elections committee. And it gets kind of even worse because he showed it on a YouTube video alongside a man by the name of Don Sinclair, who just so happens to be running against the incumbent elections supervisor. And not only did he show the usernames and he did blur out the passwords, but the point is he went one step too far. He used the username and password of one of the employees on the YouTube video, and he logged into the website. Now, I get it. Some of you are saying, Dale, the government shouldn't have obviously had systems with such an easily exploitable vulnerabilities online. That may be the case, but that still does not allow anybody to just arbitrarily try to penetrate the system. This is something that I really stress whenever I talk about pen testing. It doesn't matter what your intentions are, you've got to get permission. And when you get permission, you need to also specify what is the scope. What is it you're allowed to get into? And in my personal opinion, I kind of think that the fact that he posted it to YouTube before he notified the customer is a big no-no. We'll have to see what happens with him. Something else I wanted to talk about is what I like to refer to as it's about time Microsoft moment. You know, over the past couple of years, I've seen Microsoft come out with new technologies, and often I've said to myself, wow, that's about time, Microsoft. Way to go. And quite honestly, there are other times I think, what were you thinking? And I kind of feel like the latter when it came to the Edge browser. The fact that Microsoft blocked extensions. I was thinking, what were you thinking, Microsoft? But guess what? If you're a Microsoft insider for Windows 10, Microsoft is now allowing, yay, some extensions to finally leak in. One of the most popular ones is AdBlock and AdBlock Plus. If you're not familiar with this particular product, it's designed to block annoying ads that pop up on you when you're visiting different websites. From a security perspective, I'm a big fan of this particular product, especially with some of the new malware and ransomware that's infecting the ad networks that some legitimate sites subscribe to help provide revenue. Well, the problem is you go to a legitimate site and an ad that's off to the side is coming from a third-party source. Now, unfortunately, this feature won't be available to every Windows 10 user until Microsoft releases the anniversary update that should be coming out later this summer. If you want to take advantage of this feature now, however, you can go into your settings for Windows 10 and under Updates, select that you'd like to be an insider. Now, I want to warn you, you will be getting updates that other people won't get, but sometimes you might also get a bug or two. Now, my next It's About Time Microsoft moment is brought to you by, yay, they finally got rid of the Wi-Fi sense sharing garbly goop. When Microsoft released Windows 10, anyone who walked into my home could get my Wi-Fi password for their PCs just because they were a friend of mine. And this was turned on by default. And my other favorite feature was the connect to suggested open hotspots. Yeah. No, I get it. This feature was designed to make it easier for people to get internet access for their devices while they came to visit. Or if they were out and about and hooked up to a new network, they could click a box to share that access to contacts that were inside of Facebook, Outlook. Yeah, this wasn't going to end well. So yeah, I didn't see this particular feature creating a lot of secure environments for us. Microsoft was quoted saying that the cost of updating the code to keep this feature working, combined with the low usage and low demand, made it not worth further investment. I think the people again have spoken. Next up on my list is to get Microsoft to get rid of this feature, allowing me to get updates from PCs on the internet. Again, why did they make this thing default to on? And lastly, I wanted to talk to you guys about the Internet of Things in the aspect of, do we really need this stuff? You know, back when I was started off as an IT guy, all I had to worry about really was networks, network devices, switches. Back in my day, they would have been hubs. Yeah, I just aged myself, didn't I? But we had to be concerned about, obviously, desktop machines, servers, as well as, as the technology changed, mobile devices like laptops. But life is about to get really, really crazy. With this Internet of Things that's hitting us, we're actually creating new vectors for attackers to get into our systems. You guys all remember the Target breach? Well, they finally found out how the attackers got in. And they traced it back to a network credentials that were stolen from a third-party vendor that provided refrigeration, heating, and air conditioning. Yeah, HVAC. Now, it's not really clear why Target would have given an HVAC company external network access, or why that access wasn't completely separated from the payment system. And apparently, it's not uncommon for large retail operations to have third-party companies remotely monitor energy consumption and temperatures in different locations. We're also starting to see a huge influx in ransomware, especially when it comes to the medical field. And I gotta ask the question, are individuals or companies creating medical devices worried about the security of their devices if they're internet-enabled or network-enabled? Just because we can put chips in things doesn't mean we should. We've all seen some of the articles out there about cars being hacked. We're also seeing chips being placed inside of home locks or deadbolts. I personally use a Ring doorbell. And there was a big article that came out that said, the Ring doorbell, look out because you can hack it and find out what the person's SSID and Wi-Fi password is. Well, in some of these cases, it's not really a legitimate worry. In the case of the Ring doorbell, I kind of laughed because the Ring doorbell records the person walking up to implement the hack and notifies the home user. So yeah, it can be done. It's kind of like, yeah, you can rob a bank, but guess what? You're going to be recorded. My recent trip to a hardware store just left me perplexed because I saw a barbecue grill that was internet enabled. What? Do I really need a grill to tell me when to flip my steaks? And just when I thought that wasn't enough, I walked around the corner and saw, yes, a cordless drill, where a USB port was provided on the battery so you could charge your phone, but also it had the ability so you could find out where you left your drill. Really? This whole Internet of Thing is making us more lazy. And if you think I'm kidding, check this out. Just doing a quick Google of Internet of Things, I found some really interesting products. For example, yes, a tanning pillow that sounds an alarm to remind you to flip over. Back in my day, you fell asleep once, you got burnt, you learned your lesson, you didn't do it again. Or how about a floss dispenser to remind you to floss? And hey, it gives you a nice little smiley face when you flossed enough. Or how about this one? A device that you put on your skin to let you know if you need to put more moisturizer on it. Really? Or how about a smart bottle of alcohol? Okay, this next one I actually kind of thought was cool, but then I also thought, how lazy am I that I can't bend down and type in a combination to unlock my bike? I gotta whip out my phone and push 3 or 4 buttons. Isn't it the same thing? Or one of my favorite ones here, a little device that you put around your waist to remind you to breathe in deeply, Really? Okay, here's another one. I actually thought this was pretty cool, and then I really started thinking about its durability. But it's a suitcase that, yeah, you can see it will recharge your cell phone. It also has a built-in scale, as well as a mechanism to notify you if someone's taken your suitcase. I've got a funny feeling this thing wouldn't survive very long with the Samsonite Gorilla. Some of you youngins would need to YouTube that particular commercial. Or how about a bottle of water to remind you to drink water? Yeah, usually it's my mouth that tells me that. Or a device that tells you if your kitten is drinking enough water and if it's fresh. Or, oh, you'll like this one. How about smart deodorant? Yeah, I think something smells here. But again, you have to think of all the different attack vectors that we're exposing ourselves to. We are posting way too much information on the internet, and we expect those companies to secure our personal information. But are they? Is that their specialty? No, their specialty is in creating smart deodorant. So personally, I think as time goes on, we're going to see even more and more data being breached. Okay, I've raised my blood pressure up enough. I'm going to turn the time back over to Don. I need to go find someplace where I can just relax and get away from all these Internet of Things. I'm going to go lay down and take a nap. Oh, come on. Now I got to worry about patching my sheets?
So joining me for this month's call are two of our best-known security authors over at Pluralsight, Troy Hunt and Dale Meredith, who have been working slavishly, guys, for, what is it? It feels like about 10 years now on our extensive ethical hacking series.
It feels pretty close to that right about now.
So so everybody's kind of familiar, we decided at Pluralsight to kind of go after this series using the EC Council's Certified Ethical Hacker kind of exam objectives as the inspiration for our outline. We kind of organized the series around those objectives, but the course isn't really just an exam prep course. And in fact, Troy, I know that as we got started, you and Dale both had some concerns about kind of going down this, because there's a lot of people in the InfoSec field who are professionals who kind of aren't huge love of the entry-level kind of certified ethical hacker. And I know a lot of it's because people go take this one test, which is just all multiple choice, and suddenly they think they're a hacker and they want to get a job and get paid $100,000. How did you decide to kind of face that as you dove into the series?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, and I guess what I wanted to do was make sure that people had in-depth information about the nature of the risks. So rather than just say, you can go and run these tools and you can point these at your web things, and I covered most of the web-centric domains, I wanted to make sure they actually understood the underlying risks. So I gave them more information about here are the mechanics of how these things work, and went a lot deeper. So I'd like to think that it on the one hand ticks off the syllabus from CH, but on the other hand gives people a lot more background and gives them a bunch of courses that they can do independently of CEH as well, whether they're interested in going for their cert or not.
And Dale, you kind of did a similar approach, right? I mean, you guys kind of worked together on this, and I know some of your courses are, 4, 5, and 6 hours, which is way more than you would normally see if you were just teaching someone to pass an exam.
Yeah, one of the exciting things that I had, the experience that I had here with creating this course is when I teach ethical hacking in a classroom environment, we're limited to just 5 days. And I never get the chance or the opportunity to dive deep. It's always just a real fast-paced course, and I was excited that we were able to go through and take a lot of time, like Troy said, go through and dive a little deeper into each of the subjects and spend more time where we needed to, as well as also, keep things up to date.
Now, Dale, when we were planning the series out, one thing that we kind of all had to acknowledge is that the world of pen testing and ethical hacking is enormous. And we kind of acknowledge that this series might be someone's first step into ethical hacking, but it would definitely not be the last bit of education they ever went for. So what are some directions that you'd like to see people going after they finish this kind of introductory series?
Well, first they just need to send me their passwords to their domains. No, with this, it's kind of like back in the old days when IT kind of first started off. There was all the IT guys wore multiple hats. And it got overwhelming because there are just so many different branches that you can go off into. When it comes to security, the education itself never stops, at least not formally. Research is essential. I would recommend that, we're looking at websites that help us keep up to date with vulnerabilities that are out there. In fact, one of the things I was just reading recently is that websites are being replaced by Twitter, because Twitter is instant. When something happens in the security realm, we can be notified almost instantly. And I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of folks that I follow on Twitter, Troy Hunt, that when he posts something that I go, wow, that's really cool, go off and investigate that. Find out exactly what's going on. Play around with the lab environment. Don't assume that your network is solid all the time, because there's always new updates coming with OSs. With the introduction to Windows 10, go and see how Windows 10 interacts with some of the things that you've learned. There's obviously other certifications you can go after, but for me, it's just a continual learning process of what's happening in the world. Honestly, I think my biggest hope is that the students change the way that they think, that they start looking with a new perspective of new technologies as they come out. As, okay, what does this mean to me? This is really cool technology, but what does this mean for me from a security perspective?
And Troy, what are some specific directions you think you'd like to see somebody pursue after they finish this?
Look, I'm always a very developer-centric guy, and I talk to a lot of people that are actually creating software rather than breaking into it. But I guess what I really like to see people doing is building software with a much deeper understanding of the mechanics of how you actually exploit it. So, for example, the first course I did in this series was around SQL injection. There's 5+ hours worth of content just on SQL injection. So I would love to see software developers getting to grips with this most fundamental and most prevalent and serious of risks as well. So my hope is that it sort of spurns a whole bunch of interest and excitement from an audience that has typically been very focused on creating new business requirements, if you like, or delivering on new business requirements, as opposed to thinking about how to defend against them. So that's part of it. And I guess if we flip this and look at the security pro side of things as well, I'd really like security pros who may previously have been a little bit more focused on running things like automated scanners and tools to spend a bit of time actually looking at the mechanics of how these software flaws work. And I know that very often when I go into organizations and I do workshops and other training, the security pros actually really enjoy learning how to exploit in a very sort of fundamental way, how to exploit these risks. So how do I actually manipulate requests by hand? How do I understand what's actually going on with the queries underneath when they're translated by the web app and sent to the database? Now, of course, you've got to couple that with some automation, because this is laborious work, right? Going through and pen testing some of these applications can be very repetitive, laborious work as well. But I hope that sort of rounds out the education of people. It gives them the depth of understanding for some of these particular risks that they may not have had otherwise.
Now, Troy, it's interesting you mentioned going into businesses and doing workshops. We've recently started working with a lot of professional pen testers at Pluralsight to build out some of that intermediate and advanced courses on the subject. One thing that has really kind of blown me away is how much the people in this industry really do have to have in their heads about not only the technologies and the tools, but the kind of the craft of it all. But they're a pretty independent bunch. A lot of them are consultants, and a lot of them are really, they kind of want to create courses that would impress their hacker friends. How do you think you have to change your approach when your education audience is a full-time employee of a business rather than, that independent consultant?
Well, look, I guess the reality of it is when you're full-time in corporate, very often it can be very repetitive, mundane work, and there are some sort of fundamentals here that we've got to help these folks with, and this is where things like the automated discovery of a whole bunch of very common flaws is particularly important. And I love seeing the things that impress fellow hackers. I mean, it is awesome stuff to watch. But in most environments, that's not sort of the bread and butter day-to-day work. So this is why I think both Dale and I have tried to kind of find this spread of how do we actually talk about vulnerabilities and the mechanics of how these things work, as well as equip people to go into the office 9 to 5, day after day, and in many environments just keep looking for the same things over and over again. And I hope to take that one step further as well, that those folks who go through this start to get a bit of an understanding of how we explain security to people, and they may be able to in turn impress that within their organizations and hopefully maybe reduce the number of times they see these incidents occur in the first place via education.
Now, Dale, you mentioned something that I want to come back to, which is that you're hoping that the series helps people change the way they think about security. And it's funny because, as we start to engage with these other InfoSec professionals to try and get courses done, we'll send them to our sign up to be an author page, and they want to know where that email address is going and where that information is being stored. And can't we just talk on the phone? And do we have to do this electronically? And you really do find that there's almost a level of professional paranoia if you're doing this professionally. Is that kind of where people need to get to, though, if they're going to be an InfoSec pro?
My wife teases me. She says that just because I don't see the black helicopters doesn't mean that they're not really there. And it is so true. I mean, we walk around, she's like, you're really paranoid. We go to check out at a grocery store, and I'm looking over my shoulder to see if anyone's got a cell phone out to take a picture. I think that's probably a natural cause and effect of getting into this industry or this side of the industry, is that you do start to change the way that you think because of what you're being exposed to or what you know is out there. When I first started up my own little wireless ISP business back in the old days, I had a great friend of mine who's a white hat for Microsoft who told me, he said, Dale, do you really, really want to do this? I was like, what, be an ISP? Of course I do. This will be cool. Have, high-speed internet in my office. It'll be great. I can provide a business or a service for a bunch of folks. And he said, no, if you really understood what was happening, you would actually rethink this. And I didn't understand what he meant by that. And today I do. Because today I sit there and I go, especially with like the Internet of Things, it is just blowing me away that we're exposing so much of our lives on the internet or across these networks. And as far as, like I said, I think it's a natural progression that we're going to head that direction. Now, I just wanted to touch on something real fast that, we always talk about certification. And I get a lot of questions from the students as far as, which certification should I go after next after, listening to these courses or, after the CEH itself. And I like to phrase it this way, is that certifications really don't have any inherent value. They're worth precisely as much as people value them. So if you go to apply for a job, an employer who requires them, then obviously it matters to them. But if you go to some place where they don't care at all about a certification, then obviously it doesn't have any value there. So to me, it's kind of that simple. I enjoy having not only the real world knowledge. I hate being what I refer to as a paper. Certified person that, I can quote it to you, but I can't implement it. I hate that. That's not my goal here. I don't think that's Troy's goal here in trying to educate the folks.
Now, aside from some of the, I guess, very high level and almost conceptual, almost management level information security certifications, and I'm thinking things like, the ISACA auditing ones and some of the high level ISC squared ones. What's sort of the uptake on certifications in InfoSec? And I'll tell you kind of my angle here is, we have a big discussion about this in Pluralsight all the time. Our developer pillar really does not produce training that lines up directly against exams, because as a developer, you've got a portfolio. If you go in on an interview, you can show people code you've written and you can show them apps you've written. You can carry it around with you. As an operations person, you can't really carry around that last network you built out, and you can't share a whole lot of details about the infrastructure you've designed because it's somebody else's infrastructure. And so the certifications in the ops field have technically kind of tried to serve in lieu of that to varying degrees of success. And it's kind of interesting because you guys have both got experience on both that dev and ops side. What's your take on how the InfoSec industry in general is viewing some of these certifications that are out there?
Troy, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, so in terms of how some of these certifications are viewed, I guess the thing is to be really conscious of context. So what is the certification intended to set people up to do? And I know that one of the things that Dale and I discussed early on as well around things like the CEH content is this something that we expect people to do and then turn out to be some super hacker after that, where they go and have very large salaries with very sort of in-depth skills, or is this something which is a sort of step along the road to an InfoSec career? And we really felt that, I guess there's two ways of looking at it. In part, it is more the latter, insofar as this is what gets people heading in the right direction, and they start to sort of develop these competencies which they can then apply in their careers. And in part as well, we wanted to try and multi-purpose the content of this course so that we could make sure that people go and do this exercise, develop these skills, and then they may want to focus on one particular area. See it, I just mentioned developers. A lot of developers don't necessarily want to go out there and have InfoSec careers, but we want them to go through, do this content, develop some really strong skills, and then be quite proficient in those respective areas. So I think that the context and what we hope people to be able to do after they've done this is really important. And it's probably worth noting also, we're talking sort of 20 plus courses. Most of them are 3 hours plus, which is a really large amount of content. Even with all that, you're not going to walk out the door and like I say, it's suddenly be a super hacker, right? So this is something which is a journey for people. And I think about even the other security content I've created on Pluralsight, let alone all the other ones that are out there. There is so much more beyond this. But this is a really good start, but as I think Dale said earlier on, it's not the end either.
Yeah. I've actually noticed an interesting trend happening both on the ethical hacking side as well as on the Microsoft side, and that is a lot of times I go to teach the course, and the IT guys, I always start the course off with, okay, who's here for knowledge transfer versus who's here for certification, because I'll actually adjust my teaching mechanism or the way that I teach based off of the input that I get from the class. And I would say in the past year and a half, 95% are just there for knowledge transfer. They really don't care about the certification per se, but they're also already established within their organization. Most of my students have always been, corporate IT guys already, not the folks that are making that career change or that transitional student. I'm a plumber and I'd like to change my career. I think in some cases the certification and how I look at the CEH certification is very similar to the A+. It's a starting off point. From here, you're going to need to choose a direction, whether it's, as Troy mentioned, development, then you head that direction, or maybe it's mobile. I think mobile is going to be a huge InfoSec section that we need to be really concerned about, and somebody could just specialize in mobile devices.
So, Troy, I guess let me kind of start this off with you. What's a day in the life of an InfoSec person inside of a company look like? I mean, obviously companies have specialists who spend a lot of time doing pen testing on internally developed applications and systems. What does that look like? You come in the morning, and what is it actually that you do after you finish your email and check your Facebook?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing is that I doubt any 2 days are the same. In fact, I doubt any 2 days are the same for different individuals and different organizations. Even for the one individual, particularly given how much is changing very quickly in this industry, I think even for the one person going in day to day, there's always new threats and always new risks. So there's, again, probably a couple of different ways we can look at this. So for many individuals inside a corporate environment, the work can be very repetitive. So, I think about my experiences behind the firewall, if you like. And very often it is just going through continually reviewing apps and reviewing new business ideas and sort of seeing where are the flaws going to be in that. So there's a degree there of just being able to deal with that very regular, repetitive business nature. On the other hand, there is, as I just mentioned and Dale touched on earlier on, there's just a lot happening in the industry. There's a lot changing very quickly. And when we think about some of the incidents that we've seen in recent years, particularly this sort of new class of bug, which is getting enormously popular, that is the bug with the cool name and the logo that's suddenly all over the headlines, and everyone needs to understand. You're shell-shocked and your heart bleeds at the world. There's a lot there now that InfoSec pros and indeed IT pros in general need to stay on top of. And I'm kind of hoping that through content like what Dale and I have created, people start to get a much broader understanding of the mechanics of how IT systems, applications, and of course security work, so that when there's the next thing next week, next month, and there will be a next thing, and it will have a good logo and a good name, people have this grounding where they understand the mechanics of things like TCP/IP. I mean, that's a probably pretty fundamental one. You know, how many people understand the way these handshakes work? It's often down there at that network stack that these vulnerabilities operate. So I'm hoping that sort of gives them the foundation which they can then use when they have to deal with those vulnerabilities later on as well.
And Dale, so let's say somebody decides that sounds like it's for them. It's kind of an engaging, brain intense field in a lot of ways, which is going to be appealing to a lot of folks. So let's say I work inside of a big company and we've got an InfoSec department. What are some of the things I should do to start lining myself up to make that move?
Wow. Besides listening to my courses over again, no. One of the biggest things you can do is, obviously there's several different websites out there that keep you up to date with what's going on, but one of your biggest resources is going to be attending a security conference of some sort. Getting the ability to socially interact with people that are doing the same thing that you're doing, like going to a DEF CON or a Black Hat or a Hacker Halted conference. Also following blogs that or that are security related. There's just with the internet, there's just another day I got to use my word. There's a plethora of resources out there. Again, I think before you can say what you want to go after, you have to determine what your focus is going to be.
Now, you mentioned conferences. It's kind of interesting because obviously every subset of the IT world has its conferences, but you get to something like the Microsoft side, and aside from the big first-party event that Microsoft throws, the conferences tend to be really, really small. They're not huge affairs, and you can go easily your whole career in the Microsoft space and do quite well for yourself, if not excel. Do quite well never going to a conference. But it sounds like you're saying in the InfoSec world that face time is a little bit more important.
I think it's a great way for InfoSec people to introduce themselves and actually see what's happening. Some of the sessions that I've attended in some of these conferences just blew me away. I had no idea that some of these concepts were available, or some of these vulnerabilities that were out there, and it was leading edge stuff. So, granted, okay, it's kind of interesting because you're right, you go to a Microsoft conference and, besides the keynote speaker, that's about it. Some of these other conferences, when they offer training, where you get to go and, sit down with the guy who created Metasploit, and take a class from him, being able to ask them questions. And like I said, that interaction is, to me, it's invaluable.
So just to kind of take us to a closeout here, and Troy, we'll start with you. This ethical hacking series has covered an enormous range of topics, very much the mile-wide and inch-deep overview that it was intended to be, although you guys were able to go quite a bit deeper than an inch on most of these. Did you have one or two of those topics that were like your personal favorite, like ones that really just mean a lot to you?
Yeah, there's probably two that come to mind for me, and one would be the first one I did, which was on SQL injection. And I spent a lot of time seeing SQL injection in the wild. Recently, we've seen it against, in attacks rather, like the Philippines Election Commission. So it's something really, really serious that we do see very frequently. It's very high impact when it happens, and it's also very frequently misunderstood. So I was really interested in creating that one and going down to a really, really deep level. And I'm very, very happy with that course, actually. So that was one, and the other one, and this one sort of surprised me in terms of how much I enjoyed creating it. And it also surprised me when I saw it was rating 5 stars the other day, which is a hard achievement on Pluralsight, because the bar's set pretty high, is the DDoS course, or denial of service. So that was particularly interesting because it's such a prevalent attack which can be mounted against any application, whether it has a sort of an express vulnerability, as you might find with, say, SQL injection, or not. It is simply, you're on the internet, well, that's a good starting point. And we see that used in really obscure situations. I mean, even whilst writing the course, back in January this year, we saw anonymous DDoSing Nissan because of the whales. And you sort of go, hang on, why again? Well, because Nissan is a Japanese company and Japan has the whaling thing going on. So that is a reason to try and take down a multinational. And they caused the company a great deal of damage. And what I didn't realize until I actually went through and did the course and really researched some of the figures as well is that the cost of outage for organizations was just ginormous. It was getting into, for some of them, tens of thousands of dollars a minute to be offline. And that was staggering. So I'm actually really happy that course has done so well. And people seem to be genuinely interested in learning more about that risk. And
Dale, do you have a topic or two that was near and dear to your heart?
I really enjoyed the malware one, and we're seeing that just really hit this industry right now with ransomware and the concept of socially engineering somebody to do something they wouldn't normally do via malware. And when I was doing it, it was amazing how much information, as Troy said, is that this industry changes so fast and it's coming at us so fast as we're creating the course. Matter of fact, 3 days later, I'm reading something going, oh man, I wish I could have included this because it's just happening so quickly. My other one probably would be the hacking wireless. As I mentioned before, I had my own wireless ISP service, so that technology is kind of near and dear to my heart. I thoroughly and loved, we had the opportunity to go through and actually do war driving.
I saw that bit. That was awesome. It was really well done.
I wish I could have gone into more detail, like hooking into someone's network, but because of legal reasons, we couldn't do that. But the concept of, again, I go back to that Internet of Things. We're just hooking everything up, and it's in some cases I'm like, why? I mean, a barbecue grill that's Wi-Fi connected. Why? And we're just creating all these different security breach or security vectors that we're opening up to the outside world. And so the wireless is probably, I would say out of the two, wireless is probably more near and dear to my heart than the malware one. But both of them I thoroughly enjoyed doing. I enjoy doing all of them. I guess that'd be the politically correct thing to say. But those are my two favorites.
So we're running right up about to our time. But either of you want to leave us with a final thought to kind of wrap things up?
Look, I think the only other thing I can add, and this is after an extremely busy couple of weeks of looking at data breaches and incidents, is we obviously have a vested interest, but this is really important stuff to know about. I'm just continually stunned by the prevalence of these incidents and particularly the nature of the sites that are compromised. And if you want to sort of read into that innuendo, if you look through my timeline from the last 24 hours, it'll blow your mind. My Twitter timeline on some of the things that are actually compromised online. So now is kind of a pretty good time, a better time than ever to try and get on top of your security.
No, that's kind of a great way to stop it then. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Can't wait to see the series completed. But in the meantime, if you have a Pluralsight subscription and you've not started watching our ethical hacking series, there is plenty of material for you to dive into. Thanks again for being here, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, mate.
And now it's my turn. For this month's topic, I did a little survey to find out the most boring IT topic possible with a mission to make it interesting and relevant. Unfortunately, software licensing won, so we're going to go with the runner-up, IT acquisitions. I know, boring, right? Well, maybe that's the problem. I'm not saying that almost the entire industry is doing it wrong, but, well, how about I just don't say it? Here's the thing. Nearly everything you dislike about most of your IT environment is probably the result of bad acquisitions planning. And while you may have had no say in that acquisition, and while you may simply be suffering from the results, it's important that you be able to articulate the problem and an actionable solution to the people who do make the decisions. Become a partner to them and help them understand the situation. For example, most acquisitions come down to one basic thing after you've factored in things like what features does this software have to have? Price. And while price is important, it's certainly not the most important criterion companies should consider. For example, what about training? This happens to me all the time as a curriculum director for Pluralsight. We get a customer asking if we have a course for such and such, some tech product I've never heard of and have to Google to learn something about. The customer will tell us that they simply can't find education for the product, and I feel terrible for them. But the problem really goes back to the acquisition. You see, too many companies just ask the vendor, "What training do you have for this product?" And that shouldn't matter. After all, if the vendor is the only one interested in teaching their products, then there probably aren't a lot of people using that product. And if there were, there'd be third-party training out there for it. So you have to ask why so few people use the product. Should you be using it? And if the vendor is the only one offering training, what happens if they stop doing so or go out of business? That's a concern. The existence of a robust third-party education market is one sign of a healthy product with a broad ecosystem. And another concern is updates. Look at the product's existing prerequisites, like database servers, operating systems, and so on. Assume that every prereq will be outdated within 5 years. What's the path forward? Does the vendor force you to move to a new version of their product when you also need to upgrade a server OS? And what's the cost? How hard is it to do? Or will they continue maintaining their existing version, the one you're buying, across newer operating systems so that you're not stuck managing some legacy OS that's no longer supported by its vendor? There's no right or wrong answer here, but it's important to know what you're getting yourself into. Will you be stuck supporting legacy code for a decade or two? Are you okay with that? Write those answers down so that future generations will at least understand that a decision was made. And I think that's a key here. I'm not saying you can't make a decision that you know down the road will have negative consequences. When you do that, you're simply taking on what's called technology debt. And like all debt, it has its place in the world. It's not inherently bad. But just like most financial debt, you should write down what debt you're taking on. Just acknowledge it. If it's, look, the vendor has a track record of tying new product releases to new OS versions, so you have to upgrade everything at once. We know we never do that, and we understand that this means we'll be supporting a possibly end-of-life OS and end-of-life application. We accept that and the costs that come with it. Just be truthful to yourself about what's happening. As an IT person, you may hate that this decision was made, but ultimately, it's not your company, right? You're not taking the financial risks of running the company, meeting payroll, paying benefits, and all that other stuff. So all you can do is your due diligence. Point out the downsides and let those in charge make the decisions. Just document those decisions. Not as a way of being able to say, "I told you so," later, but so that later generations can understand that the situation was discussed and a decision was made. If the decision includes some mitigations, look, we're doing this right now and we know it's a bad idea, but we believe there will be something better on the market in 5 years and we're hoping to move to that. Well, document that too. That helps everyone remember why the decision was made and what the longer-term plan was. Don't let that decision become fragile institutional memory that nobody remembers in a year. And, getting back to criteria, what's the vendor's situation on security? How many of their developers carry secure coding certifications? Can they show transcripts that their developers have continuing education for secure coding? Do they have any way for anyone in the public to report security flaws in their product? And do they have a documented process for dealing with those? These are basic questions, and while a salesperson can lie about them, you should get them in writing, along with the right to audit the vendor's records for compliance with those statements. But Don, you say, you don't understand. We're special. Our industry is special. You just can't do this. Yeah. Funny thing, I hear that from literally everyone I talk to. So either everyone is special or nobody is, and we're all just unique. And the actual fact is, nobody asks the questions. It's not that your industry is special or your company is special. You're not even asking. Nobody uses the availability of training as a gauge for vendor ecosystem health. Nobody asks about upgrade and future-proofing policies. Nobody asks for written statements about security procedures and policies and a right to audit a vendor's compliance with their own policies. And because nobody asks, nobody gets it. Sure, you might be the first to ask, and the vendor might have to do some hustling to come up with something, and they might just say no. But get that no in writing. And while you can't take a stance on every acquisition, you should make a stand on those where you can and where you have options. I'm not speaking from an ivory tower here. I know how hard it is to go through the acquisition process. I know how political it gets. And I know it'll never be a perfect situation. But it'll also never get better unless we push our leaders and they push our vendors. We have to agitate for that change, even if we don't get it right away, because without that agitation, we definitely never will. Of course, that's just my perspective. I hope you'll share yours with me via Twitter @ConcentratedDon. Thanks very much, and that's the conclusion of our show. I hope you'll join us next month for more of Pluralsight's IT Ops News and Talk. 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 Ops News and